Welcome back. Let's see what's going to happen. Yes, welcome back. And we are WebD6201 in the winter 2022 semester at Durham, and it's week 12, part one of our broadcast and recording together. And let's talk about what we're doing this week. So we're sitting at week 12. Here we are. And this week we're supposed to be talking about authentication with Mongo, Express, and Passport. And we'll talk about what we're doing today. One thing to note is that next week, week 13, we're kind of moving all the way into the, kind of the end of that week is Good Friday. I know some people are celebrating Good Friday. I kind of put this little note here. Really, Good Friday is happening right here on the 15th, right? So that is, there's not going to be class on Good Friday. So please make sure that, you plan accordingly, that there will be no class. On that, I'm a Greek guy. So, although there's no class on Good Friday for Catholics, the following Friday, Greek Easter happens like usually a week out, one way or the other, sometimes up to 4 weeks for when it comes to Catholic Easter. And this year specifically, it's going to happen on the 22nd. That's Good Friday, and that weekend, it's a week difference. So, and sometimes it even happens on the same weekend. It's very rare. It's once every 4 years. It kind of switches around. So this week, this year is going to be one week out. So we're celebrating on different weeks, and that means that my family is celebrating on the Friday as well. While we're observing Friday, Good Friday, and we're celebrating on that weekend. So that particular week, I'm going to be working remotely for the entire week. I'm not going to come in on that Friday of the last week of the month. Okay, I'll remind you guys again when I see you guys on Friday. I know some people aren't here right now, but on Friday we'll talk about this again and talk about that just to make sure that this is happening. Last week we talked about an intro to MongoDB. We installed Mongo locally. That's what we did. We practiced CRUD operations with Mongo CLI. That's what we did. And we created some test data that we used in our practice. We did CRUD operations with using express routing, where we embedded the router, the controller and the router. It's kind of one last week. We're going to change that this week. We also did a bit of an intro to Mongoose, which is a middleware module that we use to extend Express functionality and connect to MongoDB. We also created a DB configuration file that we use for things like our local URI and a remote URI. We're going to mess with that today a little bit. Mongodb Atlas is a cloud service that supports MongoDB, and I asked you guys to sign up for that. We created a database up on MongoDB Atlas, and we uploaded some test data, and we deployed our site to Heroku, and we connected our Heroku to MongoDB Atlas by setting up our remote URI inside of our Express server. So that's what kind of all the things we did last week. It sounds like a lot, and there was a lot, and we did it all very successfully. This week, what we're doing is we're going to be talking about authentication with Passport and Mongoose. We're going to again restructure our application. I know that I always think about you, Cooper, when you say like we're breaking it and we're going to make it again, we're going to break it again. We're doing it again this week. we're breaking them again. As an example, and we're going to update register, and actually it's login. It's not just a register view, but it's login and register views is what we're going to update. That's what it should be. And because we have to update them because we have to add EJS right to them, right? So it allows us to inject some messaging inside there, as well as make sure that when we do a post request, we do a submission from those login and register views. We actually make a submission that goes as a post request to the server. That's what's going to happen there. We're also going to have to wire up registration, login, and logout functionality. And what I mean by wiring up is I mean that you have to use Passport to authenticate, and we have to use Passport to register, as well as Passport to log out. So those are the Passport functions we're going to be using. We're also going to create an AuthGuard function to prevent unauthorized access. And finally, we're going to migrate all that again from our local MongoDB server to MongoDB Atlas again. So that way we can connect to Heroku and do all that mess on Friday. So lots of stuff to do again this week. Things that are due. ICE 12 is due Saturday, like normal now. It's moved to Saturdays. Test 4, if you haven't had a chance to do Test 4, Test 4 is due on Saturday as well. Again, you get 2 attempts, to do Test 4, and which is good. We take the highest attempt from that one. Lab 4 is also due in a couple weeks, the last week of semester, week 14. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up for you and your partner and to do Lab 4 or start Lab 4, get some content. You can do a lot of stuff for Lab 4 already. Start doing it now. A lot of the stuff that I've asked you to do, we've kind of done a lot of it already with our the stuff that we put together. People, what they also say is, wait, but if I wait, then you'll give us a good starter, because that's what we're building. We're kind of building capability. Yes, I will, but you can always start, and we can always modify stuff to your Lab 4. And I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot faster than if you wait, because if you wait to get content and everything else, it might be too long. So that's why there might be a lot to do kind of in a very short time frame. So start as early as you can. On that, for Test 4 itself, that's one thing to note too, Test 4. I want to talk about a little bit about Test 4. And Test 4 is a little bit weird. Test 4 is good, but the problem with Test 4 is that it's a little older. And it might ask you questions about, hey, if you need an entry point for Express, your Express application, what is the entry point for Express? And one of the options is going to be server.js, right? But the problem with that is, well, it really depends, isn't it? Server.js would be, if you're doing an Express application from scratch, maybe the answer would be server.js. But if you're using the Express generator, then it wouldn't be server.js. It'd be bin/www. We modified all that when we used the Express generator to make our own server.js, but that's not always the answer, especially if you follow the Express generator method. All right, so that is a little bit about Test 4. Please don't forget to do it. It's worth 7.5% of your final grade, and it's due Saturday at midnight. All right, so that is what's happening there. Any questions before we move on for today?
So say for the Lab 4 where we got to do all the about page and all that stuff, could we kind of rehash some of the stuff we used in Lab 1, or would you recommend against that?
Sorry, so you mean the content? I'm okay with the content.
You know how we could go out doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If you wanted to use the same content as an example, that's totally fine. Wow, that turned on weird. I don't know what happened there. Live transcript. All right, there we go. That should disable that, and it should not give us that anymore. Goodbye. Who knows what happened there? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So so that's just content. So for content, you don't have to wait. You can certainly make it. As an example, the way you can take the information from Lab 1 for sure, because and if you're doing it with your partner, you're kind of putting the same information, but you're making it so that it is used with Express. That's fine. Or if you wanted to make something new, that's fine too. But like I said, I would get all that sorted out as soon as possible, so you don't have to wait till the last minute. All right. What about, let's go to this part. What about our lesson objectives? So this week we're talking about passport strategies. What are they? And integrating Passport into your user's MVC, architecture. So it's really our sites MVC into our sites MVC architecture, and using Passport's local strategy, which is, when we think about local strategy, that means username and password to authenticate users. That's what we're going to be doing. We're also going to be doing a brief overview of what Passport Oauth strategies are. And when we think about Oauth, it's like the ability for us to log in to a site using Google or Microsoft, right? So let's say, for example, I have a site, and we give users an opportunity to log in with a third party because they're related to some kind of, or they have an account with a third party that we trust. So we produce kind of like this three-way trust relationship where if you trust Microsoft, or Google or GitHub or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever the third party is, right? And if Instagram or Google or Microsoft or whatever that third party is trusts the user that's trying to log into your site, then you implicitly then can trust the user because they're being trusted by Google or Microsoft or whatever. And this three-way trust relationship is very common, where we see people say things like log in with Microsoft, log in with Google. We saw that last week with MongoDB Atlas, where we logged in with Google, some of us. All right, so that's how we're going to be, that's Oauth Strategies. So what is Passport? Really, it talks about, it's a module that we can use for authentication. That's what it is. Now, Passport, I got to talk about this, is not by any means related to MongoDB. Passport is a separate thing altogether. We can use Passport and MySQL or something else, some other backend database. Remember that everything is modular, and it allows you to use any kind of authentication strategy to log into your site. That's how Passport works. And I've given you a link to Passport. So up on the course shell, if we look there, we can see that there is a link to Passport. So it's up here. Here's Passport. And Passport basically is passport.js. And passport.js is fairly well supported, I would say, at this point. They've got some pretty good documentation, and it talks about what their features are. But the big thing is their support for OAuth strategies or authentication strategies. So you can authenticate with Facebook, Google, and so on. And if you look at all the strategies, there are 537 different ways of authenticating a Passport strategy. Some of the most common ones are something like, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or one of those, because they're very commonly used. But you can put in whatever you want, and it'll give you some opportunities. Let's say, for example, I want to log in with GitHub. Then sure enough, they have a whole little code example about how to log in and use GitHub as an authentication strategy. It gives you a little bit of code sampling, and so you can get an idea of how to do it. And there's also tutorials online on how to do this as well. So lots of different things like this with Passport and its local strategies. So that's what our strategy is, and that's Passport. Passport also has a pretty comprehensive API documentation as well. So if you were to go to documentation, it gives you some tutorials on how to use username and password. So if I type in username and password, it kind of goes through and talks about how to install it, how to use it, and so on. But it's not Mongoose and MongoDB related. It's just general information about how to do that. Okay, so that's kind of some tutorials about that. It also has API authentication, right? So it's a list of strategies that are being used. So here's a basic. If you go to basic, the basic strategy, and it gives you a bit of a Passport HTTP strategy, how to use that. To log in, and it explains how the basic strategy works, and it talks about kind of an API documentation on that, and as well as OAuth and OAuth 2. So if I wanted to use client OAuth, it can take you down into OAuth and talk about how to use a third-party authentication, which is really what OAuth is about. Okay, so that's kind of some information. They have lots and lots of examples on their GitHub repository as well. So if I was to go to their GitHub site, you can see that they have a ton of stuff here. And of course, we're going to get all of this information from our package through our yarn and package.json manifest that we're going to be using. Right. So this is all the documentation on Passport. It's huge. It's a big module, and we're going to learn how to use some of it this week. Okay, so that's Passport. And so again, we have this Express is so lean in that it doesn't really include everything that you need. We plug it in, and Passport is a new middleware module we're going to plug in for authentication. Question I have for you guys, again, I asked early today, and I've asked you this earlier this semester, is what's the difference between authentication and authorization? What do you guys think that is? Authentication, authorization. And we kind of go through this every time we talk about authentication strategies. Any ideas? Nithishan, Cooper? Take a shot. Worst case scenario, you're wrong. Don't worry about being recorded on YouTube. There's no pressure.
Sorry, what was that there?
Difference between authentication and authorization.
I apologize.
Okay. So what do you think it is?
So you cut it there. Authentication and
authorization.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
What do we? Oh, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Okay. Authentication is like double. It's like, you know, checking their ID. Like, you know, you go and check somebody's ID. Authorization is like the reason it's being instated, like it being authorized. Oh man, I don't know.
You ran into circles around. No, it's okay. It's okay. It's a good try. Nuthasan actually has the answer. Authentication is verifying someone, or we can also say, Nuthasan, verifying their identity, right? And authorization is giving access to something. Well, authorization is giving you not just access, but what you can do. So authentication is who you are, identity, and authorization is what the system allows you to do. Okay.
So you authorize after authentication.
Yeah. So first we authenticate. Who am I? And then when I'm authenticated, what can I do? What am I authorized to do? And that's where a role-based authentication, is there. So, for example, role-based authentication is a way of saying, well, you're part of this role. You're an admin, or you're a standard user, or you are a guest, or whatever you are, right? And we also might have groups, right, where we have the administrators group, and you're registered as part of the administrators group, and only the administrators group can look at these things or do these particular activities. A good example of that is students and professors. They have access to DC Connect, right? And students log in, they have certain access, they can see certain things and do certain things. And then when professors log in, they can do other things, some things that are different than students, and some things that students can do that professors can't do, right? Like sign in for courses and all that kind of stuff. But professors can do things that students can't do. They're authorized. They have a different authorization level, but they also are authorized to look at, different things than the student can look at. Okay, so sometimes you might say that professor can do everything that the student can do, but actually that's not true, right? Because there's certain things that students can do that professors can't, right? So that's authorization. So one thing I wanted to mention, the reason why I'm asking about authentication and authorization is authentication is a vital part of web applications. It is. But one thing we're not covering too much in this course is authorization. We're covering authentication. How do you log in? How do you register? How do you log out? Basic things that we're going to be doing. And we're talking about different strategies. And one of the most common strategy is username and password. But it doesn't mean it's the best strategy or the only strategy. All right, so that is a little bit about Passport and what it allows us to do to help us authenticate. And when we install Passport, we do it this way. We do npm install Passport. Let's do that interactively now so that I'm not talking nonstop like I did in the first classes. So yeah. So I'm going to bring up our project from last day. So here we are. I'm just going to go into desktop and go to Durham and go to WEBD6201. And for you guys are section 3. There you are. So I'm just going to kind of go into Visual Studio Code and drag and drop section 3 in there. There we go. And one thing I want to do always, and I forgot to do this last time to my shame, but I want to do a Git Pull. So always do a Git Pull. Worst case scenario, if I've worked remotely, then all the stuff that we did on Friday now is pulled locally. And now what I can do is I can kind of right click or click onto ICE11, right click, and then copy. And then kind of right click and paste, and then let Visual Studio do its thing, including the thousands of files that I'm going to get from node modules. Who cares? Let it do its thing. You can always refresh, and you can see that that's happening. It's kind of getting all the node modules. That's what's taking the longest part. Wait till this little blue line, if you can see the blue line here, kind of go across. That's what you want to see here. Just wait for that to happen. And when it's done, then what we're going to do is rename. Here it is. It's done. We can press F2. So click onto that. Press F2 to rename this to ICE12. There we go. There's ICE12. And inside ICE12, we're going to take that folder and drag and drop it so we can isolate it as something we want to work on. So there it is. And I want to control backtick. First thing I want to do is I want to control shift B. So I want to transpile immediately. So any kind of thing that is left to transpile is ready to go. So we're going to make some changes. So let the transpilation process start. And I want to run a local version of MongoDB today because we're going to add some stuff this week, today and on Friday. And I want to test locally. So what I want to do is I want to run Mongodb first. And just like we did earlier last week. And you can see that here we've connected to the server. So please do that first. And then after we run Mongo in a command line, right, now we're ready to make some additional changes to this thing itself. Now we know I'm going to make some structural changes to the site structure because I want to support MVC. I want to remove or separate our controllers from our routers. Okay, that's what we want to do. But I'm always of the mind, kind of make it work and then refactor. So first we'll make, we'll install our configuration for Passport, and then we'll refactor everything so it works inside of the new structure. All right, so the first thing we want to do is I want to go into our config folder, and I want to go into db.ts, and we want to change our host name. Actually, we want to copy paste our host name. Let's copy paste that host name. And I'll keep the host name there. We'll just comment one of them out. And I'll change the host name now to localhost because we want to kind of do things locally. And this is kind of a way of, indicating to me from a debugging perspective that, hey, localhost is what we want to use, right? But we want to use our local URI, not our remote URI. Right now, we're using a remote URI that includes my password. Who cares? But for what I want to do here is if I go to my app.ts, what I want to do is in here is instead of debug config remote URI, let's change this to local URI. So I'm going to connect locally again. Okay, there it is. Save. And what this allows us to do is test locally. Okay, so now that I've made that change, let's test it locally, connect locally by using Nodemon. So I'm just going to go to the PowerShell here and go Nodemon. And we should see us connecting locally to our local host. So I've changed to local URI, which means the local URI is MongoDB, like it shows here, 127001 contacts. Contacts is the database, and that's what it's doing here. And the other thing to check is what is in our database. A little bit of review from last week. Let's open up another PowerShell and just type in Mongo. And if I type in Mongo and clear the screen, we can show DBS. You can see that I have my contacts database. I can use contacts to use the database. I can show collections, right? To show the collections, I have contacts and users. Let's do a users.drop. I'll do that. I'll say db.users.drop, right? And there's no more users, right? So I was playing with that today. So that's what that does. And if I do a show collections again, show collections, then you see that there's only contacts. That's fine. What is in our contacts collection? db.contacts.find.pretty. And you can see that we have this stuff in our contacts collection, right? That's what we had before. This is our test data that we used when we made that up last week when I went to our data and I had our contacts.json. We kind of used this information to kind of pile into our contacts, both locally as well as on Mongodb Atlas. That's what we kind of did. Okay, so this is where we are. It's working. Everything is great. Let's put this up on GitHub. So let's go to a new PowerShell and go git add dot. It's going to be a bit of extra work. Git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for in-class exercise 12 and git push. So again, there's some changes we have to make, still some changes, and that's fine. But now at least we have everything up online. Yay. All right, so we want to install Passport local, Passport Local Mongoose. We'll install a bunch of stuff right now, and so that we can prepare for our configuration changes to happen here. So let's just close off these things. And I want to take a look at our package.json, which is pretty good. Package.json says ISO 10. It should be ISO 12 right now. Wow, I forgot you guys. We also, if you have any kind of README file or anything else, that also would have to be updated. I'm going to save. And notice that we have some dependencies and dev dependencies. Well, we need to add more. So let's do that. So we'll say, again, yarn add. And the ones we want to add is passport. There's also a module for local passport authentication, username and password, which is passport-local. There's a helper module that someone came up with, which is passport local mongoose, which actually allows us to use a different encryption strategy that's built in. It's a simplified version for us. We're going to use that with that one. We also want to include express session because we're going to use cookie-based authentication for this thing. And then finally, something called connect flash. Those are the modules we want to add. So passport, passport local mongoose, express session, and connect flash. Okay, and I'll just copy this whole line. So copy, and I'll see if I can paste it inside of our lovely chat. There's the thing, and I'll also post it on YouTube for those people who need to see it on YouTube as well. Okay, so there it is on YouTube. All right, so that is the command that you would use, yarn add and so on. So then if I press in enter, it's going to kind of add all those modules and new modules in here as well, which is pretty cool. I need to add in some dev dependencies for this too, because we want to not just have this stuff, but we also want to have some code hinting. So let's do that, code hinting support. So we'll say yarn add at types. And one of the first types is going to be, again, passport. And then at types, passport local, at types. And I found today that, again, in other days, that passport local mongoose already has a lot of the stuff inside of it. You don't need to have passport local mongoose. So we're not going to include that one. We're going to say at types express session, that one we need. And then at types / connect flash. All right, and then it's minus dev. So because all of these, any at types are dev dependencies. And if I press enter, it's going to update our dev dependencies to include all those things. Right? Awesome. So again, I did not make one for express passport local mongoose because passport local mongoose itself, if I look at my node modules, it has a lot of information already built into it. All right, so cool. I've got all this ready to go, and I want to save everything and make sure things are good. A lot of times what this does is it causes a problem with our config app.ts. Right from the get-go, sometimes what it does is it doesn't like the way we connect with our router. So sometimes our router index, if I do that in the index.ts file, if you scroll all the way down to something like our error message, where you have an error callback for create, it doesn't really like this. It doesn't like that when I put the error callback in there. See, notice I have this, right? And if I put the error callback, if I do that, let's go put that error callback in there. It takes that error away, right? But now that I've got those packages in there, you're going to see that we're going to have other things that come up. So I haven't installed passport local mongoose. Let's see if that is going to help us or hurt us. All right, cool. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this. And now let's start going back to our configuration. So the first thing is we installed passport. Second thing is we want to configure passport. And the way we configure it is there's a couple of steps to take to get there. So let's get to that first. And I'm just going to pull up my notes because there's quite a bit of configuration to go with this one. Well, the first thing that we want to do is I want to go back to my Visual Studio Code and I want to look at our app.ts. There it is. This is our app.ts. And at the top, we can see we have a bunch of imports. So what are these things anyway? Well, these are middleware modules or plugins sometimes or whatever to add in. So this is kind of like modules to support the Express server. That's what all this stuff is, right? And there's a module here, module to connect to MongoDB. That's what this is, right? Well, I need some more modules for authentication. So let's put that in there. So we'll say modules for authentication, right? To support authentication, we'll say to support authentication. So the first module we want, of course, is our session. So I'm going to say session is equal to express session. That's what the first module should be. The next module should be passport. So we'll say import passport, as an example, and we want it to be import passport. Wow, from passport. It's even quicker than I am. All right. And the next one is import our passport local from passport local. Okay, so that's our passport local strategy that we're going to put in there. Later on, we're going to have other modules as well, like cores for cross-origin resource sharing. We don't have that yet. The next one is we want some kind of authentication, objects, and I like to say objects or the authentication model itself, and some other things. Let's say an alias, right? Our strategy alias. And what I normally do is I do the alias first. So I'll say like let local strategy, well, we'll use that at some point, is equal to our passport local dot strategy. Okay, that's kind of an alias, right? For us to type in local strategy, it means passport local strategy. Then we want to have our model, our user model, but we don't have a user model at this point. And that's kind of the next step that we want to take. We want to implement a user model. So what I want to do is I want to go to our models folder here, and I want to add a new file, and I want to call it user.ts. And it's going to, of course, duplicate because, or, kind of propagate with our transpiling. I want to grab everything from our contact.ts right now, just to start off, and I want to kind of paste it into our user.ts. So that way contact and user are the exact same. Why? Because there's some stuff that we can reuse. One of them is this schema thing. So contact schema is equal to schema. Let's change this to user schema. And we're going to put user schema down there because that's new. And we're also going to change the model name to user. Hey, awesome. Our collection for the users is users. So that's our collection that we're going to make in the contacts database, users. Okay. So obviously this is all wrong as well, because we shouldn't have, the user model have full name, contact number, and just an email address, right? That's incomplete. What we want instead is we would like our user to have a username and password and a bunch of other stuff. So let's also consider some additional things to add. I'm going to make sure that we have an import statement for passport local mongoose, and that's going to equal to, or imp or from, we'll say, passport local mongoose. We want to have that one. And passport local mongoose, what it does is it says, hey, everything is good, everything is beautiful. It says, okay, we're good, but somehow it says that could not find declaration file for module passport local mongoose. And wasn't it the thing that we left out? And it tells you what to do. It says try npmi --save--dev types passport local mongoose if it exists, or add a new declaration file containing the declare module for this one. Wah, wah, wah. That's not what we want, right? That's negative, right? So that's going to give us a problem with what we're declaring, but we need it, or otherwise we won't get good type definitions. Where passport local mongoose is used, just to give you a sense of this, is down in here where we want to use a plugin. So we want to say, hey, user schema. We want to use as a plugin, we want to plug in passport local mongoose. That's what we want. So see how it lights up? Still an error here, but at least passport local mongoose is lit. Okay. And we want to also cast, for us, we want to cast our user schema as a, so TypeScript won't complain is bad, as a passport, kind of as passport local schema, right? Passport local schema. Really what this is if you type in mongoose dot passport local, that's what you want. But notice that that doesn't exist. Passport local doesn't exist. We're not getting good code hinting because of, well, we haven't included passport local mongoose. Let's add it back in. Now, why am I telling you this? Because we're going to get an error in our, because there's some issues, there's some clashes with our some old stuff and some new stuff. Let's add it in. So here's how it's going to take away this error. So yarn add at types passport local mongoose minus dev. And yes, it adds it in, but it also takes away this error. So what you'll see that this error will disappear. Hey, it's gone. And then I can start casting. I can say as passport local schema. Notice that that comes up as an option now that we can get from Mongoose. But the problem with this is what we want. But the problem with this is it clashes nicely with our node modules. In node modules, it says, hey, at types. Okay, what's the problem? Let's scroll down to passport local mongoose. It says, well, in node modules in passport local mongoose, there's also a mongoose folder. There's mongoose. And we have an index.d.ts here that basically says that, hey, we're declaring mongoose, the mongoose module here again, right? Because they've already declared it. Okay, well, that sucks, right? And if you scroll down, there's some other errors. It says that, well, we have our states. It says it cannot redeclare block. We've already redeclared states because this is the exact same kind of thing here. And session options, we already declared, it says that session options is unresolved and blah, blah, blah. And we go down, there's a connection and collection creation. You can see there's like a ton of errors that exist here, right, for all of this stuff. And I'm showing you this because this is where the problem lies. Collection base, here's our document. And yes, it's pretty cool. On the plus side, we have, some really great code hinting that we already have in here. But we also have this type definition library that is clashing with the one that we already have. So some strategies around this, right? Notice that it has browsers and index and build and browser. One thing I want to point out is Mongoose itself is the module that it has in here built in, but we also have Mongoose here, where this is the Mongoose itself that is here in self already has a declaration. Remember, we never had to include Mongoose because Mongoose, the type for Mongoose is already inside of Mongoose, which is way down here. Okay, so there's a Mongoose module. And you can see that we have at types, and inside there we have all of this stuff: connect, document, error, index, schema, options. All these things here are things that we want access to, right? And all of this is already in there. It's already included. So some strategies. We could modify what we have. I'm just pointing this out because this is something you might want to try. You might want to go into at types and go down into node modules and Mongoose and go, we don't need this, and just delete it. You just go in there and say goodbye Mongoose, right? Delete it, and then move that to recycle bin, and we don't need that anymore. Refresh, and then it's going to disappear. All the errors are going to go away, right? Okay, nice. And temporarily, you're correct. All the errors are going to go away. User still has all this. We still have all this good stuff. No more errors because we removed that from the node modules. If you don't have any errors, that you'll get errors, guaranteed, right? But so why do we do that? What's the bad thing about that? Well, my friends, if I was to go back in here and if I go to my package.json, package.json says that I want my types passport local mongoose to be at least 6.1 or higher, right? This is where we may decide to say, don't upgrade what we have. So just literally put in a kind of a tilde character in there, and the tilde character says, no, we want this one. This is the version, okay? So, and here's something else. When we push this up to GitHub, if we're going to pull this back down, it's going to try and install Mongoose inside of that node modules folder. We're going to have to remove it again. Just FYI, it's going to come. It's going to happen, right? So let's leave it at, the tilde tells me exactly at 6.1.0, not greater than, okay? Now that we've done that and we've configured our models, we've made our user model, we're not quite done. We need to figure this out because this is incorrect. So again, what I like to do, thinking about what it is, I want to make it so that I want to match here what we had before in our client data. In our client data, we had display name, email address, username, and password. We're not going to use password here, but I want to do display name, email address, and then username, those three things. So let's put that inside of our model. Now there's issues that'll come up if we did this, but let me try it anyway. So display name is this. So display name, we'll just type in display name here as part of the things and maybe spell it properly. And email address is going to stay, right? And then like we did before, our user.json should have email address and then a username, right? So that's okay. Let's do the same thing. So here's email address, and then we'll put in a username. Caution, the way we put username in matters, and we're going to see that later on this week on Friday. So we're saying username, capital U, nice. Okay, we think that's nice. And then we're going to have to add in, let's add a couple of additional things. I want the date that it was created and the date that it was updated, the profile for my user, okay? But I'm going to show you the more extended way to define a type. You can say that the type is a date, and we can also give some default data, which is date.now. That's some default data. We can also define a, when we updated our profile, let's say we update the profile, add a picture or whatever later on, we can add as many things to our profile as possible in our user. So we can say that this is the updated, kind of property. And it's the same thing. We have a date type, but the current date is date.now because the beginning created and updated are the same. And then when I update later on, that's the one that gets changed. Okay, so that is our user schema now. So again, collection is users. We plugged in our passport local mongoose, and so far we're golden. And let's press save, and that's great. And now that we have our model, this is our model for our user, let's push this up to GitHub. So again, clear git add dot, add all that stuff, git commit -m, and we'll say added user model, and git push. Git push will push this up to GitHub, and we should be pretty good to go. We're going to get some other errors, and some of them we might just ignore. We'll talk about why in a second. Okay, so cool, we've got that. We've got our package.json, we added that in there. We got our users.json, we looked at that as an idea. We have our users.ts, we created our model. Now we're back down to here inside of our application configuration. So in our app config, what we want to do here is takes the next step. So now that we have our local strategy defined, we want to also add in our kind of our user model. And what does that look like? We're going to say import user from, and then it is / models / user, just like we've done before. So now we have our user model. And if I hover over there, it says it's a mongoose model. Wait, what? How is it a mongoose model? Didn't we change that to something else? Let's go back to our models and see what that looks like. So here's our user.ts, and we're saying that this should be a passport local schema So our model should be a different kind of model than what it's showing here. This should be a passport local model, right? What's going on here? How come this is not doing what I'm supposed to do? Well, hopefully it will. Let's see how it goes. So save. So what this does for this, okay, so we kind of plugged in, we casted our passport local schema. We added that in there so that our model itself, which is the user model, the user schema, is going to be cast as a different kind of schema. That's what this does. This part right here does. Okay, and that's beautiful. It says also, by the way, you could also have done this instead of this. You could have said something like mongoose dot passport local schema. That's something you could do there as well. You could have done it explicitly, or you could have done it with the import statement above. Either way, it's the same thing. All right, great. So now that we have that, and if I go back to my app.ts, we can continue to configure. All right, so that's the first part, is we use the user model, and then we move on from there. All right, so what else? So, well, we added to our authentication, we added session, passport, and passport local, but it'd be nice if we added Flash as well. Let's import Flash. So we'll say import Flash from connect Flash. So again, when we import Flash, this is, let's talk about what these are. So express session, this is our cookie based session that we're going to set up to support authentication. This is authentication support. This is our authentication strategy. Remember, that's username and password. And Connect Flash is our, it kind of provides things like authentication messaging. So that's what that is. Now, we talked about this briefly where we said, okay, I'm in a login screen and I'm trying to log in, and then I have an error logging in. So what does that give me? Nothing, because when I press the submit button, it makes a post request. It goes back to the server. And when it goes past the server, the screen has cleared. It has, refreshed, right? So even if I have a problem, how can I send information back there? If I was going to try and do with front-end technology, JavaScript, it's going to fail because I updated it and then it cleared. So there's no more error, right? So what I want to do is I want to capture the error, right? And I want to use this Flash object to hold the messaging for authentication, if everything is good or not. I want to hold it inside of the server, and then I want to return it back if there's an error. So that's what I'm going to use Connect Flash for authentication messaging, which is kind of an important thing to do, at least to give feedback to the user for good user experience. All right, cool. So now that we have this, we go down into the next part. We set up our app configuration. This is our app configuration, this part. And that includes things like routing, etc., right? We do our DB configuration here, where we did it last week, where we connected to our database, and we output our host name and all that kind of stuff. One thing we can do is for our connection, right? Notice this says Mongoose Connect is equal to dbconfig.local URI, right? Well, we can kind of figure out if we can kind of define if, we're connected. Do I want to use my remote URI or my local URI? Which one do I want to use? And we can swap this out. We can kind of switch out which of the connections we're going to use depending on if we're if we're using if we're on Heroku or not. Okay, so we can kind of think about how to make this more dynamic than what it is right now. Right now it's pretty set. It's local or remote. Right now I'm using local URI because I'm testing locally. But maybe, on Friday I'm going to switch this to remote URI so I can test remotely. Okay, this is okay, but has limitations or issues. And I'm going to keep going down. So again, I've connected. I've made my connection to MongoDB. Yeah, that's great. And we've configured our environment variables. There's two. There's one for views, another one for view engine. And that tells Express to set up some information about where our views are and where the what type of view engine we're using. We're using EJS. By the way, one of the test questions you might get is for Pug, which is a view engine, how do you do blah, blah, blah? You'd have to look it up because we're not using Pug. We're using EJS. Okay. Same thing with Jade. Jade is a templating engine. Pug is another templating engine that's taken over from Jade. And EJS is the other one. So if it asks you for something that I haven't talked about, look it up. It's going to be very clear what it is. All right, and it's good learning for you. Next, we do some configuration. And this right here is all of our middleware configuration. That's what this part is right here. So it kind of adds our logger, which is Morgan, express JSON, URL encoded, cookie parser. We add some static routes. And then just before we do our actual routing, what we want to talk about here is how to start connecting and initializing our passport. So we want to first initialize Flash, right? And the way to do that would be to say something like app.use Flash, right? Where we use our Flash messaging. Then I want to initialize Passport. And the way to initialize Passport is app.use, and then we want to go passport.initialize. And that kind of initializes Passport and saves the result inside of our middleware, right? And then finally, for Passport initialization, we want to say that Passport session is also something that we want to use. So this is Passport initialization. And if we save the server, and if I go back to our PowerPoint, this is exactly where we left off. We added in Passport initialize and Passport session. We want to do this before the route declarations. So that's before this part right here. Okay. Great. Are you with me so far? So this is the first piece of the first part of the stuff we're doing. Thanks, Cooper. How about Nithan? Are you good too? Excellent. Thank you for that. All right, so that is the first part of what we're doing. Next, now that we've got this piece in, I want to implement an authorization strategy, or authentication strategy, I mean. So I'm going to implement an auth strategy, which is, in our case, going to be local strategy. We're going to say, this is the simple way to do it. Passport, hey Passport, I want to use, and this is kind of like where I want to add a almost like middleware to the middleware function. I want to configure Passport now, and I want to use user dot, and I want to use the create strategy method, right? So create strategy is a method that I want to use. Create strategy should work, but guess what? Create strategy doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it even come up here? It doesn't come up because I've removed the configuration details from my this module, create strategy. It only is listed in my Mongoose configuration that's inside of our Passport local Mongoose. It's kind of a clash between those two type definition files. Okay, that's what's happening here. So that is an issue. User create strategy should be there, and I removed it all. So we're going to fix this in a second. That's the first error we're going to fix. Second one, I want to serialize and deserialize, right, our user data, right? And the way to do that is I'm going to say passport.serialize user, and I want to say user dot, and I want to type in serialize user, right? But I can't type serialize user because serialize user does not exist, because we've removed our code hinting for this kind of stuff. When we fixed our problem, we fixed a problem in one hand and we didn't fix our problem in the other side, right? So that's a problem. The other one is we want to do a passport dot deserialize user. We want to say user dot deserialize. And again, we don't have a deserialize user function, and we're not getting any code hinting because we've removed those pieces. how do we get them back? Because this is really what we need. And this is where we're getting our errors right now. So let's save that, right? Once we save that, we can always check to see how that looks. Oops. Let's go back to that. We can always check how that looks in Nodemon, right? So here's our Nodemon. It looks like we're connected. If I go to my PowerShell for Mongo, and if I go to clear, if I want to show collections, right now I have a users collection. And if I go db.users.find, I have nothing in there, but a users collection has been created. And the reason why is because it's using my model. That's good. This is a good sign. So this is okay, and it should work because of everything else. We just need to make it work for TypeScript. That's the biggest problem that we have. We're just not working for TypeScript. So why is that? Well, because when I went back into my package.json, we did this insanity, right? So let's put this back to the caret for a second. Again, breaking and putting it back, save. And if I do a yarn install, this is the beautiful thing. If I go back here and go do yarn install, it's going to see that if there's any packages that need to be resolved, it will resolve those packages, right? But we have removed our @types password local mongoose. We have to put that back. So let's kind of put this back up, and I want to put this back in there again and see if this fixes a problem, if it puts back all the stuff we took out. Let's do that. So it goes in there, resolves it, links it, puts it back in, and does it fix our problem? Well, now, if I go to this part right here, then, which is this part, well, create strategy is still an issue, serialize user is still an issue, deserialize issue is still an issue. Well, that's coming from our models. Here's our models, our user model, right, where we said that our passport local schema is a model, and it says mongoose model. Right there, we know there's something that's a problem. Okay, just to show you this. This is the problem right here. My passport local schema is something that I want to save. And notice if I have it in there as a passport local schema or not, when I hover over, it says mongoose model. And let's just get rid of this. And let's see, did we add that back in? This is just code hinting, right? But it's giving us these errors. So let's go back and go into node modules. Here's our node modules. And if I go to @types, you see there's no errors because passport local mongoose, even though there's been it's been in here in node modules, we have mongoose. There it is, right? Now it's been added back in, but somehow there's no clash, there's no error, and there should be. And this is what you were saying. What you were saying. Yours just worked, and mine doesn't. Just the way it works, right? When you add, depending on the way you add it in, and all this kind of stuff. Let's now try and make it. Let's cast it as a passport local schema. So there's different options for the passport local schema. If I click onto it, right, it adds it in. If I press save, then it should transpile. And when it does, this model should be changed. Instead of a mongoose model, it should change to a passport local. What does yours say when you hover over, Cooper?
Yeah, it just says mongoose.passport local model.
Shouldn't. This is mongoose model right here? Shouldn't. It should be another, it should be something totally different.
Passport local model.
Yeah, it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Yeah. So that means that something is broken with what we've done. Passport local mongoose computes, right? We see that that's okay, right? And passport local mongoose gives us a mongoose schema. That's one thing that's happened here. And I'm just going to check my notes for a second. Make sure that this is good. User schema, mongoose schema, user schema as passport local schema. That looks okay. And then we get a const model that is totally, it should not be a, it tells me I can tell there's a problem because it says mongoose model here. And that's why I'm getting a problem here with these things. And the reason why is because it can't find create strategy, right? Again, sometimes what we got to do, right, is closing down Visual Studio Code and coming back into it might be okay. The other thing to do is wipe it out, like actually delete this part altogether. So delete Passport local mongoose, like locally inside of node modules, and then get it reinstalled again. So go back into our thing and just do again a yarn install, right? So make sure that your package.json is closed up, and you might even want to remove it from this altogether, your package.json, save it, and then when you do a yarn install, right, it's going to go through and anything that's missing will be added in, but we can always add in Passport local mongoose again, which will kind of go in there and try and solve it from the very beginning, right? So that's something that can be added in multiple times. Not a problem. Now we have a problem with node modules, right? And I want that problem because that problem is the thing that's going to fix up my users model. Because if I go now and go into model, right, it's going to say mongoose.passport local model, which is what we wanted, passport local model, right? Okay, and I have to do like a couple times, right? Remove it, put it back, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what we want, passport local model, which means if I go back to app.ts, it solves this one and it solves this one, but it doesn't solve this one. So if I go to definition for serialize user, it takes us into this passport local mongoose node modules index.ts, and it says serialize user and what it returns. So user is of type T. This is the declaration that you're looking at for TypeScript. TypeScript is declare some stuff. Create strategy returns a passport local strategy. That's what it returns, because what this also needs is it includes passport local that's in here. So in the node modules folder, it says, if you go into Mongoose, it includes Mongoose, and it also includes everything that you need. Okay, that's what happens here. So index.ts is where all the type definitions are saved in here. And what it's saying is, to show you this, that we can set and change password. We can authenticate and reset attempts. This is all part of the passport local document, configuration that we have in here. And it's all open to us, so we can go through here and change anything we want, okay? That's where this is. It's inside of passport local mongoose here. But funny enough, when I came in here and removed our mongoose module, it says declare module mongoose. This is not the error. There's no error here. But it says reference types mongoose, reference types passport local, right? So that's what it's trying to find. It's trying to find mongoose, and that's why it needs mongoose in here, inside of passport local mongoose, right? But the problem we're having now, this is good, I'm fine with that, but the problem I'm having now is in my app.ts, it says, man, serialize user is returning the wrong type of user. So there's two overloads. One overload is the user is returning is of type user, capital U, right? And the other overload is another type where I have an incoming message, which is a request, and then a user, which is of type user with a capital U. All right, so those are the different types of things they can do. And that is for what's being returned by our passport local model. That's what's happening there. So if I go back to that index.d.ts, the type definition file itself, it says that passport local document extends document. That's the document itself, right? And it says that what it gives us is a couple of things here. It says that it gives us set password and change password. And then passport local model, notice that passport local model is a template type, right? So generic, right? Which extends the model type, whatever that model is that we're using. And then we have serialize user and deserialize user. And the callback that we're getting is this one. It's specific to the one we're getting. It's user type T, whatever the user we declared was. And the user we declared was, we called it user. That's the user type, okay, that we're using, user dot. And that is the user, that's the model that we're using. So it's the user, capital U, that we're putting in here that's being used, okay? And you're like, hey, Tom, this is great. Why do we care about all this stuff? Thank you very much for that, like, lovely, necessary information. Well, yes, but this is the course of our problem. Remember, this code hinting is coming from a file, that d.ts file. And every single time we kind of get together, and if like last semester, it was working just great when I was doing something like this, right? But this semester, it's not, it's not, right? So what does that mean? Should we give up? And the answer is no, I don't give up. I try and find a solution. Sometimes it's us modifying our files manually. And one thing that we also know is in our passport itself, so up in here in passport, we can also look at the index.d.ts for passport. Passport also, if I look in here, it has a login, logout. Notice the login, logout are spelled like lowercase I and capital I. Both of these are okay. Logout is authenticated. We have a namespace passport where we have authenticated options. These are all the authenticating options, right? As well as the authenticator, the passport static, right? Which is something that we can do because this is the passport. By the way, this is the passport namespace. So here's our express. Inside of the, we're adding to the express namespace this new stuff. We're extending the express namespace is what we're doing here. And then we're adding to the passport namespace, is the passport namespace right here, all of this stuff. Well, passport also has something called use. There's a passport strategy, a passport strategy created static, success and fail and redirect and all that stuff. What we want to see is, can we use a passport.use? And passport.use comes from express, because use is an express thing, right? We have an interface user. Okay, here's our express user. Oh, look at that. Our user is our interface user. And in the namespace express in the passport in express, it says user is, well, whatever user is, right? But don't we want our user to be our model? That's what we want, right? So I'm just putting it out there. Like, this is the user that we're adding in, the user, which is an express user, right? And it's an empty user. Look how it kind of gives us the express user is like nothing, right? We want to be able to add to the user whatever that user model is, right? And that's what I want to go with. Okay, we have authenticated and those kind of things, but we want to be able to change this user object, this interface user, so that it's, it says, well, the user that when we get a request, the user is a user, which is of type user or undefined. That's something also that we want to use, right? That's in our declare statement. So there's something we can do, is what I'm saying, so that we can match the users up. Okay, so this is what they're looking for. The express user is what they're looking for to give you a sense of this. But what I'm giving them is something totally different. Let's see what that is. So if I go back here, it says, if I hover over, it says that the object returns a Mongoose document. That's what it returns, a Mongoose document, right? And that is the user that it records. So serialize user, the user type is a Mongoose document, any. That's what it returns. So maybe we can say that the user has to be whatever it is, right? But we can also accept that it's also not just undefined, but also a of type Mongoose document. Okay, that's passport. Passport and Mongoose have nothing to do with each other, right? Just to put that out there, right? So that is what's happening. And also, if I look at serialize user expects a passport serialize user expects a user express user. So if I go to that, go to definition, then again, here's serialize user, right? Serialize user needs a user, and it must be of type express user. That's what it needs. There is no other type of user. So what can I put here instead, guys, to fix this problem? Come on. Could. We could, but Mongoose doesn't exist here. Here's what I could do to fix this.
Oh, T? No. Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between T and any?
T is a template. Remember, it's a generic. We don't have generics in here.
Right.
But if I put any in here, so any user type, right? Then what happens is now if I go back to my app.ts, it's solved. It's solved. It's solved because what I've done is I've changed what it's expecting. We can change whatever we want. So if I go to definition for serialized user, it is of TID. TID is the template type. That's the template type. And it says there's two. There is an ID of TID, that's what's going in here. But the user has to be, they're listening for an express user. And I'm like, yeah, no, nope, I don't care about that, right? I'm okay with if it's of type any, right? So that's why I put any in there. That's how I fixed it. It is definitely 100% a temporary fix. And I'm sure that they'll come up with something because these type definitions are clashing. That's what they're doing. And we can still see that they're clashing down in here, right? Because it's basically saying that in the index.d.ts that these things have already been either resolved or they've been, these things here, create collection, as an example, have been already redeclared. Like a lot of these things we're redeclaring a lot of the stuff that's already here. So path to skip, it says a list of paths to skip, blah, 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 duplicate identifier. It's already been done. So what I could do, again, is come in here and then look at all the errors and one by one, to make so that, so just for TypeScript not to complain, I could like literally come in here and just comment it out. I can just like, okay, I don't want this one and I don't want it. Like, this is my file. These are my things. So session options, it says, namespace has no exported method. Session options, I don't know what that is. And because we're redefining stuff, it says here's a connection. It says connection was also declared here, right? Duplicate identifier. Well, that means that if I'm duplicating this one again, then there's a couple of ways to do this. One, I could replace my index.d.ts here with the original one from Mongoose, but warning, if I did that, I might come back and give myself some other problems. So here it is right here. And you can see that in types, we have a couple of things that have been redefined. And there isn't a single index.d.ts file. It's all of this. It's all of this stuff, right? So either I take all of it or none of it over there, right? That's the problem. The problem is there isn't just one index.d.ts file. So either I kill this one, which kills the latest version of Mongoose, or guys, you know what we do? We just sit there and ignore the error in node modules because, hey, it's just there to help us anyway. Now we're going to get an error in routes. Let's fix that one. So if I go to index.d.ts now, we see that there's an error in routes on line 91 with our contact create, which we have to remove. And we won't get an error here anyway. Poof, right? So we're not going to do this. We're going to just ignore these. Don't save. But what we did change was with that one line that we had a problem with. So again, I'm just going to clean all this up to show you where I changed it. 1 second. And by doing that, I'm just going to go back to my app.ts to show you that there's no errors anymore. I changed it by going to Passport Serialize, right-clicking, and going to Go to Definition, which took me here to Serialize User. And I changed the user type, which is specified to express user. I put in any. And what any did was it gave me another way of putting things in here. We could also redo the same line if you're really finicky, right? Where you can say something like any or express user. You could say something like or express dot user. If you really want to, you can do that, and you can specify two types, either one or the other, and it's okay. If I go back to my app.ts, then it still is okay, right? So it could be the user's type is any. right? And that's the one that we're using, that type that we're building up, right? So if I go to definition again, that's how I changed. That's how I fixed my problem. I told you guys how I fixed my problem, and this is how I did it. I fixed it by creating a new thing. So I could do the other way around. I could say, okay, well, it's not just, oops, let me undo that change. So error would be any. I did the wrong thing, but it should be dot user or any. That's the other option. So if I save this file, and if I go back to my app.ts, and if I hover over serialize user, you can see that the user that we're getting is any, because that's the one that's closely matching this one, right? Yeah, good to go, right? Because when we define, we can define types, and again, this might be confusing, but if I go to definition again, one more time, if I go to definition, this is just our headers. This is our headers for our actual function. Yeah, Cooper, just delete the error, callback is correct. Yeah, that's what it is. Thank you, guys. All right, great. So now type definitions look like they're okay. I got a red line for node modules, but who cares? Because they're just there for us to help me out. I know what the problem is. I can ignore that problem, and I can close off my index.d.ts file and press save. And let's do it again, where I can say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say things like added support for Passport, and then git push, which did all those things we just did. That is support for Passport. Nice. Okay, nice. That's excellent. And what this does, the PowerPoint basically steps you through and talks about that same thing, where we download and install Passport local, and it gives them some code snippets that we've kind of put in here from before. So there's nothing in here that we haven't covered at this point. Okay, how to connect, how to create a user model, and all that stuff. Yes, go on.
What was that last line you just did?
Which line did I change?
Did you change anything in that function there? Oh, okay.
Is it showing up like this for you now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
You were typing it.
No. But there are a couple of things we're going to revisit. One of them is our login view has to change, because sure, we've added in partials for our header and footer, but we want to modify our message area here. We also want to change the form from a method from nothing to a form.post, because the form itself should, when I click the submit button, it should submit and everything should work. So there's going to be some changes coming up with the things we're doing. There's also another bug that we have in our code that I'm going to pull, that we're going to look at together when it comes to logging in and everything. And by default, Passport Local Mongoose likes a lowercase u username. We've specified an uppercase U username. That's going to be interesting how this is going to work, if it's going to work at all. And if not, there are two fixes. One fix we're going to mention, and I'll kind of call you up on this later, is in our user schema, change the username to a lowercase u. That is a fix. There are other things we can do with options. So user schema plugin also comes with some options, and you can specify whatever options you want. For example, you can see that there are a bunch of other options that you can select. This is stuff that comes up, but these options for our Passport Local Mongoose, there's a bunch of options, right? This Passport Local Mongoose this is a plugin for Passport Local, right? So what are the plugins for these things? Well, since we're using our Passport Local Mongoose, then the documentation for that is up online. If I go to Passport Local Mongoose, and if I scroll down, it shows us those same things. We haven't done anything wrong, right? And if you go down, you can see that there are a bunch of options. So here are some options you can use. You can use things like attempts field, last login field, right? And it even goes down to talk about our password validator. We can make our own custom password validator, or our an async, or the username query fields specifies alternate fields of the model for identifying a user, example, email, instead of, what we're using. Okay, so those are things that we can have as well as part of our options. So options, there's a lot of different options. These are the main options we can use. Key length, an interval, max interval, username field. Username field, like it says, look, defaults to username, lowercase username. Take a look at that, right? This option can be used if you want to use a different field to hold the username. For example, email, right? So if I want the email to be the username, not the username itself, I could specify that in the username field option, which means I could say something like username fields, right, which is that exact same. Username field be lowercase username field, and then something like in brackets username. Okay, so that is something that I could specify as an option. And I'm just pointing this out. Let's see what happens. Does it pick it up, or do I have to do this on Friday? And so I'm going to copy paste this thing, and let's see what the answer is. So I'm going to say something like, hey, is it this or is it this? This is going to be my reminder for you guys when I see you guys Friday morning. Okay, so these are the two options. Is it this one or is it this one? Okay, cool. So that's one thing we've done. We've updated those kinds of things. The other thing that I want to do here is I want to restructure our code. So right now our code is client, config, models, and so on. And by the way, like I said, we've run through most of these things. There's nothing really much we haven't covered at this point. We're going to cover more when we get together on Friday. We'll talk about how to do the rest. But I want to restructure our site structure right now. That's one of the things you're going to need for your lab report. And I'm going to make a brand new folder. Let's make a brand new folder called server. And in the server folder, I want to drag and drop views, routes, models, and config. But I can't do that right now because I'm running Nodemon, right? Your watch keeps crashing? Yeah, okay, just rerun it. That's weird that it would crash. Mine is still okay, it looks like, I think. Or does it? Found 119 errors for files, watching for changes. Let's rerun that. Let's rerun that PowerShell for, let's run that Control-Shift-D. Oh, by the way, make sure that, again, when you're building tsconfig.json should definitely exclude node modules. We don't want to have anything like this working, any node modules at all, right? So you should already have that. But let's do a Control-Shift-B and make sure that your watch task is working. Even if it gives you errors, it's going to give you errors in node modules, not errors in your code. These are all errors in node modules. All right, so that's fine. But what I want to do now is I want to turn off Nodemon, so Control-C, so turn off Nodemon. So then I can move stuff. If I have Nodemon running, I can't move anything into anywhere. So I want to grab my views, right? And I want to drag and drop it inside of my server. Oops. I want to make a server folder. There's my server folder. I want to take my views and drag and drop it in there, okay? I want to take my routes, drag and drop it in there too. I want to take my models, drag and drop it in that server, right, folder. There we go. And I want to take my config and drag and drop it in there too. Awesome. And my client stays outside. That makes more sense. And that is my server now. My server, I have client, node modules, and server. And then I have my server.ts out here. But there's a problem, right? Let's Control-Shift. We already did Control-Shift-B. Server.ts rerouted. Take a look at that. Server.ts said, let me just save all. It said, hey, server config app, right? That means it's looking inside of server, going inside of my config. As an example, here's my config and looking at my app.ts, and we're good to go. However, my app.ts needs some adjusting. Let me explain where. So here for routes, that's okay. Like inside of routes index.ts, there's no error. We're good to go here, right? So there's no problem here. Because why? In our app.ts, it goes, let's follow the route. It goes from here up one, right, to this level, down into models, and down into, user as an example. There's user. Same thing for roots. Goes up one, goes back into roots, and then into index or users. No problem. It does those things. So that is all correct. But where we get into trouble is down here with client. Client is not, it's on the same level. It's up two. So it's going to go up one, up two to client. And the same thing goes with node modules. You have to change that to up one, up two to node modules. That's what it would look like now. And those are the only changes you have to make to your app.ts when you pull it into server. So now our server structure looks like this: client, node modules, and server. To make it even better, what we can do is node modules should be inside of another file altogether called common. All right, but we're not going to do that right now because that requires some additional changes to our package.json. All right, so that is where this is. Awesome, that's great. And tsconfig.json is there and everything else. Let's make sure that it runs. So I'm going to pull it back into, I'm going to pull back node modules so it's running. So Nodemon, you can see it connected. Nice, everything's nice. And let's go back up to our code and go into contact us. And yeah. So this is interesting. It says, did you forget to use Express Session middleware? We never tested this. It says, error, login sessions require session support for our contact, right? So if I went to 000, right, or localhost 3000, let's go there. It says this. It says, login sessions require session support. Did you forget to use Express Session middleware? Did we forget to use it? Wow, I never had that error before. But let's see that. It says its contact is a 500 now, right? That a 500 error is an error altogether, right? Like a total error, right? So that is an issue. Did you guys get this too? Yeah. So again, we have app express. We have down here where it says app use, and here's passport session. But what we forgot to do is use an express session. That's one thing that's missing. Let's reconfigure that before we go. And that's okay. So what that looks like is actually very silly, but we'll talk about it in a second. So just underneath where it says express static, and before app use flash, we're going to set up express session. Here it is. And it looks like this: app.use session. And inside of the session, we're going to do a couple things. One of them is a secret that we need. And the secret is going to be dbconfig.session secret. Remember that session secret? If we hover over, that is WEBD6201 session secret. That's what we put in the DB file. That's one of them. And the other thing I want to put in is save uninitialized as false, as well as resave as false. And each one of these options, if I save this now, secret, it says this is the secret used to sign in the session cookie. This can be either a string for a single secret or an array of multiple secrets. It says if an array of secrets exists, only the first element will be used, blah, blah, blah. Best practices may include the use of an environment variable to store the secret, which we would do inside of our Heroku. Periodic updates to the secret while ensuring the previous secret is in the array. So that's something we can do. Save uninitialized, it says, forces a session that is uninitialized to be saved to the store. The session is uninitialized when it is new but not modified. Choosing false is useful for implementing login sessions. Cool. Resave. Resave forces the session to be saved back to the session store even if the session was never modified during the request. So this is something that we want. We want these options as is. So if I press save now and go back to our page, and if I refresh, we should see everything is good. Sessions are enabled now. And if I go back to contact and I go to show contact list, we should see our contact list as is, which means everything is working as it should. Now let's put this up on GitHub. So again, going back to here, we're going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added express session support, which we didn't finally do before. And that should give everything that we need so that we're ready to go for the next part, which is to actually do login and register and then do some protection and authguard of some kind as well. All right, are you guys good? Did you guys fix that problem? So isn't that interesting? So without express session, right, it will not work because we're using cookie-based authentication and it needs a session object for us to do that.
Okay. Were you expecting that to happen at all?
I just forgot to put it in. Oh. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, I forgot to do that. Let's take a look. Okay. Yeah. All right, so that's it for today, guys. I know we were right to the limit. I don't want to do more. There's more we can do, but we're going to get together on Friday, and there's lots we're going to do there too. Any questions before we go for the day? Let's see if there's anybody on YouTube that has a question. Nope, looks like they're good. Okay, guys. All right, I'll see you guys Friday morning. Thank you so much. I'll stop recording now. Hey, no problem, man. Take care, and we'll see you on Friday. Yeah.